So today is the first lecture in Unit 7, and this is going to talk about the Earth in the past, the present, and the future. So even though there's some things about the solar system formation and the universe formation that we're not sure of, we're pretty sure that Earth formed like most planets in our universe. Basically, it was a collection of gas and dust that started to have a gravitational pull and started to spin, and then more gas and dust collected until planet Earth was formed. We're pretty sure that planet Earth is about 4.6 billion, that's billion with a B, years old, so that's very, very old. Very early Earth, so billions of years ago, did not look like the Earth we know today. So we know this nice blue, watery planet with the land masses. That's not what it looked like in the very, very early stages. Basically, very early Earth was a big ball of fire. There was lava, there was lots of volcanoes, it was very hot, lots of lightning all the time. We didn't really have a fully formed atmosphere, so there was lots of meteors and asteroids and things like that would hit the Earth constantly. So very not compatible with life very early on. There was some liquid water, not as much as we have now, but there was a little bit. But even the water was hot. And the biggest thing with early Earth is there was no oxygen. So oxygen as we know it today, breathable oxygen, actually was formed by photosynthetic organisms. So in very early Earth, we didn't have those organisms, so there was no oxygen. So basically, the Earth was uninhabitable. That's why there was no living things there. You just couldn't live there. It was too nasty of a place to live. So where did the life on Earth that we know of, very complex life, come from? Again, this is one of those question marks. We're not really sure. We know what early Earth looked like. We know there was some important, chnops chemicals there because we know it was in volcanoes. So we know there was carbon and there was hydrogen, there was nitrogen. There was not oxygen, however. And we know those things kind of existed, and they existed in the air and they existed in the water. At some point, a single cell organism kind of showed up. We're not super sure how we got from those inorganic chemicals, the carbon, oxygen, the chnops, to this living cell. So we're not really sure how that happened. There is some guesses. The first one is called organic transfer or organic seeding by a meteor. So we do know the Earth was getting hit by lots of meteors, lots of comets. We have collected meteors. The Earth still gets hit by meteors. It's just for the most part, when it goes through the atmosphere, they're very, very small and pretty insignificant. But we do know that there's meteor rock on the planet. We found it. So when we find that rock, we were able to analyze it. And the theory goes that at some point, one of those rocks, when there wasn't an atmosphere, was carrying life on it. So it was carrying these single cell bacteria-like organisms. And when that rock hit the ocean, those organisms then, jumped off the rock and into the water, and that's how we got these single cell organisms. That is one theory. Another one is that primordial soup that we've talked about before, the idea that those inorganic components, those chnops elements, in combining with the water and the lightning and the electricity, actually made early nucleotides, which then formed into DNA and RNA, and then we kind of went from there. And then finally, RNA world hypothesis isn't so much about where the RNA came from. It's the idea that early life was based on RNA and not DNA. So those single cell organisms that were in the water actually were made of RNA. RNA, remember, is single stranded. It's a little simpler than DNA. So it kind of makes sense that early Earth is going to have that precursor to DNA, that more simple RNA single strand than a full DNA strand. So what evidence do we have to back up these claims? The whole idea of the meteor seeding, the Earth object seeding. As I said, we have analyzed meteors. So the ones we have now have never had a living thing on it. We've never found a living thing on a meteor rock that we found nowadays. But analysis does suggest, so when we take these rocks and we see what they're made of, there is those chnops elements there. There's things that could make DNA. So the possibility exists that there could have been a living organism on these meteors as they were falling to Earth. Again, this is a theory. It's not proven. There is some evidence to back it up, but it's definitely not something scientists would say, yes, this is how it happened. It is one of the, prevailing kind of leading theories of how life kind of got started on Earth. We've talked about the primordial soup experiment. I would say this one has a little bit more scientific support than the meteor seeding. It's the idea that these inorganic compounds we know existed in the water and in the air in early Earth because of the volcanic activity. And at some point, mixing with, electricity, which does happen. If you mix, certain gases with electricity, they can form compounds that at some point spontaneously, these early building blocks of macromolecules formed. So it would be things like simple sugars, very simple fatty acids, amino acids, nucleotides, and eventually over time, the nucleotides kind of found each other and joined up and made DNA, over the course of a long time. But that's the primordial soup experiment idea. This is just recounting that Miller-Urey experiment that tried to replicate the primordial soup. Remember, they put a bunch of the, CHNOPS elements into a little glass bulb. They used some electricity to spark and kind of be lightning, and they had some water over here to represent the ocean. It wasn't super successful. They didn't get, an abundance of simple macromolecules. They did get some, so we kind of say this is a semi-success. And again, this is partly why I'm not saying, this is what science thinks happened. Primordial soup is not, the be-all, end-all theory, because this experiment kind of didn't get true results proven. So a little bit of results we saw, but not full on, and not enough for science to say, yes, this is definitely how it happened. And then finally, the RNA world, just the idea that when this life was formed, it having RNA molecules in its nucleus or in its cell just makes more sense than DNA because of the simplified nature of the RNA. RNA still has genetics. It still has the nucleotides and nitrogenous bases. It's just single-stranded, a little bit more simple. So that would kind of go with what we know of early life on Earth. The timeline of life on Earth is kind of really hard to wrap your head around because we're talking billions of years. So I'm going to have you watch a video that compares the life, history of Earth to a calendar. And you're going to see that life has only existed, in the last 5 minutes or 1 minute of the calendar. So this is giving you a general timeline. The numbers on the top are in billions. So we're 4 or 5 billion years ago that some of this stuff was happening. So there was a long time where early Earth was that big fireball. Then, we had some liquid water. And then at some point we had those single cells form. So all life on Earth at some point was just a single cell, very simple organism. Those single cell organisms started to photosynthesize. They started to produce oxygen that was first in the water, dissolved in the water, and then went into the air. And then we got some, more complex single cell. Then we went to multicellular organisms. And then from there, it kind of just exploded into all these different organisms, eukaryotes, prokaryotes, all those different kind of things. At some point, some of the organisms, went on land, and then the land animals exploded, and then we kind of went from there. But again, this took a very, very, very long time to happen. The idea of common ancestry says that all species, every living thing on this planet has descended from a single common ancestor far, far in the past. We're pretty sure that common ancestor was a single cell photosynthetic prokaryote. And then we can kind of go forward a little bit and say all animals were from kind of a single animal, all fish were from a single fish, and everything just kind of, evolved and separated from there. We do have evidence to suggest the common ancestor theory, the theory that we all came from a single prokaryotic cell. The evidence that exists is very similar to evidence of evolution. So we have fossils. We can put fossils in order and see very early cells, very early life, and see that most life was cellular. The idea of homologous structures in our anatomy, we have completely different functions for some of these structures, but we all have, the upper arm bone and some of those similar features in our limbs. And again, that kind of just gives credence to the idea that we all came from a single organism. Embryonic development is another one. So we all, vertebrates and invertebrates look very similar in the very early stages of life before our cells really start to differentiate. And kind of the biggest one, the biggest evidence for this common ancestry is that all life on Earth is made of the same DNA sequence component. So you, grass, a bird, all has DNA that is made of nucleotides that are similarly structured. and they all use the nitrogenous bases A, T, C, and G, those purines and pyrimidines. So the fact that every single one of us is made up of the same building block gives evidence to the idea that we all came from one single common ancestor. There is one curious exception to this. Actually, octopus do not follow that DNA rule, which is giving some evidence to scientists thinking octopus are not from this planet. They did not evolve on this planet. Essentially, they are aliens that came here a long time ago. So you can look up that octopus alien theory. It's quite interesting. So this is just giving you picture representation of what we just talked about. So here's the homologous structures. So obviously a human, cat, whale, and bat are very different creatures, very different lifestyles. But all the limbs in these four creatures have a similar structure in that they have a top part bone. They have two kind of middle, lower arm bones. They have a wrist-like situation, wrist-like bone, that's the yellow. And then they have kind of fingers, which is the blues, and the kind of palms. So even though a bat wing and a whale fin and a human arm have very different functions, we use them differently, that structure is similar, which again gives rise to the idea that at some point all of these organisms, all four, came from a common ancestor. Over here showing you the fossil record of horses. So we can actually put these fossils in order and kind of see, an early horse down here versus a modern horse, and kind of what changed and what stayed the same and how it evolved. This is showing you the embryos of different, down here, different vertebrates. So this is a fish, a reptile, a bird, and a human. Again, very different creatures, but look very, very similar when you're comparing them in terms of their early embryonic anatomy. And then over here is just showing you DNA sequences of different organisms. They all have those same kind of sequences, which is giving, evidence that we all had the common ancestor. We have some evidence as well that humans are currently evolving. And the idea is if humans are evolving now, we probably evolved then. So the idea that, us evolving currently gives kind of evidence that at one point we also were evolving. So some of these recent evolutions that we're seeing in humans, one is lactose intolerant. So lactose intolerant is where you can't digest lactose, which is the sugar in milk. It's estimated that 75% of adults cannot tolerate lactose. This is more than in the past. There's a lot of different theories about why this is happening, but it is something we're seeing. We may be totally off of dairy milk soon. We've seen disease resistance and bacteria in our own diseases kind of show up. If you have sickle cell disease, you're actually resistant to malaria. And there are some people that are just naturally resistant to disease. There were some people that were naturally resistant to COVID. Blue eyes seems to be disappearing. The idea of blue eye color, it derived from mutation a long, long time ago, but it seems to kind of be evolving out of the population. Wisdom teeth as well. Your wisdom teeth have no real use. So we're finding people who are born without their wisdom teeth. I myself only had my top wisdom teeth. I didn't have my bottoms. Antibiotic resistance in bacteria. We're seeing bacteria evolving. And then the COVID-19 we saw evolve very quickly, which is what viruses do with all their different variants, the alpha and all the names they gave them. So evolution is really important to survival. Changing with your environment and learning to adapt to a new environment and surviving in that environment helps you live. If you are not able to change and adapt, what's mostly going to happen is you're going to become extinct. So extinction is where you have a dying out or extermination of an entire species. There's lots of reasons why animals go extinct. A lot of them are human related. So you can see, some of these issues, habitat fragmentation, global change, global warming, natural disasters is something that could happen and kill out a population just kind of naturally. Overexploitation of species is overfishing, overhunting, all kinds of human effects, both on the environment and, the animals themselves. Genetic inbreeding. So us kind of messing with the animal's DNA. We see this in dogs. So all the different type of breeds of dogs that are existing now. If the animal has poor reproduction rates and an already declining population, usually that makes things worse. We do sometimes see extinctions kind of go with each other. So animals that live in a similar environment kind of start to become extinct together. But sometimes it's random. Sometimes we have animals that go extinct where other animals are thriving. Extinction isn't always bad. Extinction can lead to the rise of new species and kind of just the change. The example of that is the dinosaurs. If dinosaurs did not go extinct from the meteor hitting the earth, humans as we know it most likely would not be here. We evolved from very small land mammals that existed with the dinosaurs. And when the meteor hit, these land mammals were able to hide in caves and underground. That's how they survived. And then what happened was when the dinosaurs were out of the way, the land mammals kind of became, higher up on the food chain, higher up on the list. And that's how we evolved from there. If the dinosaurs never became extinct, those land mammals are never beating the dinosaurs at their game. The dinosaurs are always going to win. They're going to win the evolution game. So if dinosaurs didn't become extinct, humans probably wouldn't be here. Now, we don't want animals, to go extinct for no reason. But extinction isn't always bad. We are working to kind of quell the extinction of some real important creatures on Earth, but that's what happens. So one of the big extinction stories you may have heard about recently is the white rhino. So the white rhino lives in parts of Africa. It has all but gone extinct. We still have them in zoos, so we've had them in captivity, but in the wild, they've pretty much have been declared extinct. And you might have seen some stories about this where they were actually declared extinct before every single one of them died off. Most recently, the last surviving wild male of the species died off. So the reason why you can kind of claim an animal's extinct before you lose every single one of them is this idea of the extinction vortex. So we've talked before about how in order to survive or for best survival, you have lots and lots of different organisms with lots and lots of different traits, so they're able to survive, any hardship that comes on the population. When your population gets too small, so we look here, a small fragmented population, what ends up happening is you have to get inbreeding occurring because there just isn't enough animals. So when you get inbreeding, you're getting genes that are too similar. You're not getting a mix-up of genes, so you're losing a lot of your genetic diversity. And then when you lose your genetic diversity, you're less able to survive, changes in your environment, which means your population gets smaller, which means you kind of just go into this, that's why we call it a vortex. It's like this cycle. So they can kind of start predicting an animal's going to go extinct very early based on the number of animals. So they knew a couple years ago the white rhino was most likely going to become extinct because there were so few living in the wild. So they knew, a population of 40 rhinos, of 30 rhinos just isn't enough. They're kind of in that small fragmented population, and all that's going to happen is they're going to keep inbreeding, losing their genetic diversity, dying off, and then that kind of vortex, that tornado shape takes place until they all are gone. We tried to save them. We tried to breed them in zoos and in captivity and then put them back in the wild. They were killed as soon as they were put in the wild. They were poached. So they have pretty much become extinct in the wild. We have, a decent number in zoos and in captivity, and that's where they will stay. They're trying to kind of interbreed them now with another type of rhino, but that's not really going to be a true white rhino species. So that is one story of extinction that we saw in our lifetime. These are just some examples, kind of fun things of other extinct animals that used to live in North America. There used to be a lion that lived here, a camel. That's kind of giving you an idea of how our climate was different in North America. A mastodon, the ancient bison. The bison's an interesting story. So you hear a lot of times, the animals that live in Yellowstone are buffalo. They are not buffalo. That's just a misname. A buffalo only exists in Africa. They are bison. So the true American bison has gone away. We are trying to get that back. We're actually breeding them with cows to try to get the bison back. A short-faced bear, a mammoth, a saber-toothed cat, kind of a weird horse thing, and then this big giant sloth creature. They all existed in North America millions of years ago and have since gone extinct. Most of these have gone extinct because of the change in environment. Some of them were around with the dinosaurs, so when the meteor hit, they also became extinct. The World Wildlife Foundation and other kind of environmental groups are the ones who kind of keep track of animals and their numbers. So you can have an animal that's endangered, critically endangered, vulnerable. You see the little categories here. And it all is about how many there are and kind of where they are in that extinction vortex. Once they get put on this list, They work to try to save them in terms of saving their environment or maybe breeding programs. And they have had success of putting animals on this list and animals coming back off the list. So basically animals that were threatened, they did some damage control, and then the animals kind of bounced back. But some of the animals that are currently endangered, the rhinos, that's actually a black rhino, some breeds of porpoises, cute little red pandas, tuna, the tuna from the overfishing, trying to keep control of fishing tuna. Basically every type of elephant. I think this is an African elephant. Sea turtles as well. Pretty much every type of sea turtle. This is an African painted dog. This is another breed of sea turtle. Orangutans are in big trouble, in their environment. Most of their issue is environment encroachment and people kind of getting rid of their environment. Penguins, because of global warming. This is a whale shark. They have a hard time breeding and they take a long time to breed, so they're having some issues. And then tigers, both species of tigers. So we all love animals. What can you do to help animals? These are just some kind of suggestions. There's a lot of stuff where it's, recycle and try to use less electricity and use less stuff, because stuff has to come from somewhere. And a lot of times where it comes from is they clear land or they get rid of animals' habitats to make stuff. So anytime you can recycle, that will help. Trying to keep your water clean so we're not, damaging the oceans. Sustainability in terms of your food. So like we said, tuna is a big one. They're really overfishing tuna. So is there another fish choice or another, animal product choice that you can eat for protein instead of something that's a little bit endangered? Chemicals you use to clean your house or clean your car, especially those chemicals that are going to, go into the water. Just all small things you can do to try to save animals. You can also kind of look up the World Wildlife Fund and some of these other funds that are going to save animals as well.